Welcome to the Feeling Better podcast. My name is Maria, and I'm the host of this podcast, former gambling addict and devoted Christian homesteading wife. I'm also the author of the Feeling Better 10-4 program that teaches you a practical, effective, inspirational 10-week program to help you overcome your compulsive gambling addiction, which you can listen to in the first 15 episodes of my podcast. Thanks so much for being here. In today's episode, I'm going to be reading from my new book, Imbalances, The Addict's Guide to Fixing Our Broken Lives. This week is Chapter 3, The Imbalance of Self-Importance, aka Know Your Role. So, out of all of my podcast episodes, this one is going to be the hardest one to record and publish because it's going to be the most vulnerable and the most exposing of them all. If you're listening to this, it's going to be a juicy one. It's even going to be harder than the early ones when I talked about my lowest moments as a gambling addict. This one digs deep into my guts and sheds some light on some hard truths about why I fell into a gambling addiction in the first place. Ultimately, why God allowed it to happen. I've always said that I'm keeping this podcast real, and I can't help you heal your broken lives if I don't work on healing my own. Let's start with this little story first, though. Back in the day, I used to watch American Idol. Funny how back then, I never gave a second thought to the name of the show. But yet today, as a Christian believer with a big old jar of eye ointment, I find the title of that show so cringy. But back in 2009, there was a contestant named Lee DeWise that I loved. He had an amazing voice, deep and rich and smooth like butter. He definitely had incredible talent, and I rooted for him the entire time. Yet, even though his vocals and performance were on point, Simon Cowell kept criticizing the fact that Lee was too humble. Lee would get up on stage and sing his heart out, but he didn't have the confidence, presence, or self-assurance of one who's got a world-class singing voice. Simon kept telling him in each round of the competition that he needed to own it, believe in it, play the part, recognize his value, and get into the mindset that he's an idol, a rock star, a winner. Lee never fully embraced that, though. His humility and desire to simply be a talented guitarist and singer could not break through to the next level of getting on stage as a star. To this day, his rendition of Leonard Cohen's song Hallelujah is my all-time favorite. I bought it via iTunes years and years ago, and I still play it on occasions. Hundreds of musicians and singers have covered that song, and I still think Lee's is the best by far. As far as I know, Lee has a large devoted fan base, but he still hasn't reached the level of fame that Kelly Clarkson or Carrie Underwood achieved. And for me, I can honestly say that I found his humble character and hesitancy to own the spotlight a breath of fresh air. I could so identify with that. I hate being in the spotlight. I was totally one of those people who was completely content to fly below the radar. I never had any desire to have fame or fortune, and I always knew that I'd never be the big female CEO of a company or lead an organization in any major way. I never even really liked the idea of stepping into any kind of leadership role, to be honest. My goal was to marry a guy, have a few kids, be an awesome mom, and run my little household as wife and mother. You know, have a garden, cook some meals, raise my kids, support my hubby, and maybe just embrace the traditional roles of a housewife, like getting involved in some PTA or school events. That was the extent of how far I wanted to take the whole lean-in concept. There are some out there like me who have no desire for big success, or fame, or fortune, or who don't feel comfortable with a spotlight on them, even if they have massive talent or skills or some grand business idea of some kind. And yet, along the way somewhere, around the time social media really began to take off, we've all fallen into the trap of believing that we're more important than we really are. We began to see ourselves as elevated, as worthy, as having status and notoriety and influence and prominence in our position as individuals. Even if not on a grand scale, we still, as a modern society, tend to believe that we are the center of our own lives, and perhaps should be the center of everyone else's too. We believe that we should have a standard of living, a standard of success, a standard of importance and value and validation. You'll understand better as I share more, but for now, let me just tell you that this, my friends, is a serious imbalance in our lives. Because at its core, this mindset of self-importance offends God. Many of us, and I'd say most of us to be truthful, minimize God into some side genie waiting off in the wings, only to be summoned to step in on our command, at our direction based on our needs, our wants, and our desires. We think we know best how our lives should look, and what we should have, and what we should do. And we care far, far more about what other humans think than what God thinks. This is where it gets deep and raw, and dives into the real guts of my addiction. To be honest, I only just came to really understand this over the last few days. You know how I keep saying that I don't know exactly what I'm going to write or talk about, or how I'm going to address a topic ahead of time? It's totally true. I have the outline of the 20 areas of imbalance that I'm going to share here over the course of this book, or podcast, but I genuinely have no idea how I'm going to present it. Sometimes I think I have it ahead of time, and I'll begin to shape out the details and some thoughts. But I always pray on it, and ultimately, God comes through with the real details, how He wants me to present this. And so far, He's completely changed the way I approach each and every topic. It was only these last few days that I had an epiphany as to why I fell into my own gambling addiction, why God allowed that spiritual attack to happen. And I'm going to share it all with you in all transparency and all honesty. I mean, again, my ultimate goal with this podcast is to help you figure out your balance and empower you to make better choices, more informed decisions, and grow stronger in your own faith and in your own perseverance so that you don't get attacked again. But my secondary goal is to fix my own broken life and recalibrate my own balance. You know that, right? I was a gambling addict and I fell hard. And there's a reason why I fell hard. The thing is, though, that I don't want that awful season of my life to be for nothing. I don't want it to be in vain for no reason, nor do I ever want to fall prey to that level of spiritual attack again. And while the first two topics I brought up are definitely the two most important, this one is right up there with them. Here's the thing, folks. A lot of people pray. They pray over a meal, or they pray during hard times, or they pray for a blessing of some sort when something big is on the horizon, or they need something. Some prayers might be a bit shallow and superficial, but still important to that person, like saying a little prayer that they grab those perfect concert ticket seats, or praying that their book lands on the bestseller list, maybe praying that they reach 1 million subscribers on YouTube. But prayers may also be totally valid and understandable, like praying for a new job or a gig, or getting your offer accepted on your new home, or praying that you get a big bonus from work so that you can finally put in that in-ground pool for the kids in the backyard. I'm totally channeling my inner Clark Griswold with that one, if you're a fan of National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. Even those who aren't devout Christian believers will at times pray. But yet, most of us, and I'm including myself in this category, haven't recognized the Almighty Father for the powerful, sovereign God that He is. We reduce Him down to someone who possibly, if feeling gracious enough, might tally up our prayers in some kind of heavenly scorecard, or who might step in during those critical times when we really need Him. And I believe wholeheartedly that we've become, unknowingly and unsuspectingly, a generation of people who think me, 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 instead of him, him, him. We see lack instead of blessing. Instead of seeing His mercy, we only see frustration over the absence of things we want. And we celebrate our own personal success instead of seeing the grace that actually comes from God. we put far more emphasis on what people think, on what our reputation is in society, how we look, what we have, what we accomplish, or what we don't have and what we haven't achieved yet. All of it has far greater importance in our lives than the simple question, "What do you want from us, Lord?" Or, "What should we have and what's most important, Father God?" Now, time for my crazy, gut-wrenching story to illustrate this particular imbalance. I've provided a smattering of details about my hubby before. You all know that I love him deeply and that our love is mutual and special and steeped in faith. You also know that my husband is a felon and spent some time in prison. He's a very right-brained individual who's extremely talented. His special gift and talent isn't important, but what's important is that when I met him, I adored his faith and the way he turned his life around as a saved Christian. He told me repeatedly in the early days that he was once a guy that he didn't like. He sold drugs and eventually became addicted to them himself. He was a hustler his whole life, selling drugs and doing petty crimes and walking on the wrong side of the law. He was expelled from high school and never cared a bit about any education. But when he was in prison, he realized what an idiot he had been. I said before that I don't blame him at all for any of it. He was the result of a parenting fail. I've talked about my father-in-law before, so it's not hard to see how my hubs became a messed up delinquent teenager as a result. So when we met and then eventually got married, I totally supported him in his gift. He believed wholeheartedly that God had blessed him with a special talent and that God wanted him to use that talent. And he also believed that God would bless him even more, helping him to become super successful so that he would become world famous and accomplished. I could easily see that happening. He had the gift, and he had the charisma, and he was absolutely one of those American Idol type personalities that was super comfortable in the spotlight. Simon Cowell would have loved him. He believes in himself, and he trusts in God. My husband might not be someone who reads his Bible regularly or devotes himself to study, but he has an unwavering, almost childlike faith that one day God would do great things with him. His conviction was so strong, and his belief in God's plan for him was so unwavering that I didn't doubt it for a moment. I loved his self-confidence, and I also loved his noble goal, to achieve success so that one day, when he was at the top, he would give God all the glory for turning him from felon to fame. And while we didn't have kids, and I never got to be a mother, I at least had this. You all know that line that we humans tend to say, right? Tell God your plans and then watch him laugh. Meaning you can make all the plans in the world and set your sights on all that you want to accomplish, but God very likely might have other plans for you instead. So I embraced God's plan. Instead of supporting my children, I'd support my husband. I truly believed this was my God-given destiny. There's also another saying out there. Behind every successful man is a strong woman, right? I believed that as well. And so I gave it my all. My husband and I just celebrated our 7th anniversary. Yeah, we met late in life, in case that wasn't obvious. And for those 7 years, I worked full-time, bringing in nearly all the money and taking care of all the bills while he worked on his divine plan. Once, early on, he told me that he believed he'd be well on his way within 6 months, and maybe within a year, or 2 at the most, he'd be close enough to his goal of success that I could quit my job and help manage him and his business and schedules, etc. The problem was, at around the end of year 4, beginning of year 5, not a whole lot had happened. Admittedly, he had several close brushes with the big break, having some relationships or interactions with famous celebrities, agents, investors, YouTubers, public personalities, and more. And during that time, my husband has always worked on perfecting his craft and building his brand. He immersed himself in social media, making connections, networking, meeting influencers, creating some side hustles that helped bring in a little bit of money. He never stopped believing in God's plan or the success that would one day come as long as he stayed faithful, determined, and didn't give up. He worked harder at this plan than anything he'd ever worked on in his entire life. But all the while he was focused on that goal, I was the one who did the daily grind of working full time. I got up early and got ready for work while he slept in. During the day, he worked on his stuff. No schedule, no boss. On occasion, when he needed a break and wanted to go fishing, he went fishing. No need to request time off or carefully consider how much vacation time he had left. If he wanted to hunt during hunting season, then he went hunting. And because he never held down a real job or spent time living as a real adult doing real adult things, he also had a bit of arrested development. He never once in his life had a mortgage or paid bills or paid taxes or anything of the sort. He always, his whole life, did what he wanted to do when he wanted to do it. And so, in a classic enabling, codependent kind of way, I simply took on those tasks because I was better at it. I spent my whole life cleaning my home, cooking, doing laundry, paying bills, making appointments, managing the finances, taking care of the pets and animals. So I just took on those duties in our marriage too. Of course, since I took on those tasks as my own, my husband gladly and without complaint allowed me to own them. Sure, he cut the grass and weed whacked and managed some of those guy chores around our place, but 90% of the stuff that needed to be done around our home was done by me. As you can imagine, I suddenly found myself at about 5 years in looking at my life and saying, what in the mother-loving monkey feet do I even have going on here? Because this was the crux of it. You know those yokes I talked about before? Those heavy burdens we carry on our shoulders? The yoke that was set upon my shoulders, the one that I knew came from God, was, at its core, two things. 1, love my husband unconditionally, and 2, support my husband unconditionally. And those were completely noble, perfectly reasonable, and absolute blessing-filled directives that God gave to me. The problem was, though, that those two things were wrapped up in my role as a wife, and as a pseudo-mother to my husband, and as a housekeeper/maid, and a cook, and an accountant and finance manager, and as a tech support person because I'm way better at the computer stuff than he is, and appointment setter and calendar manager, and personal shopper who bought all the groceries and household items. And since I did all of the driving, I even took care of keeping the gas tanks filled and getting the oil changes. And all of that I did while working a full-time job, and, oh yeah, in the last 6 months here, spent any spare time left over doing my Christian ministry work via this podcast. And if I was really lucky, I'd maybe get to work in my garden a little bit. On top of all that, as icing on this whole big messed up cake, my husband had always known what his gift was and what he was supposed to do with it. Nothing is more impressive than someone who's talented with a special spiritual gift. But what was my gift? What was my goal? My talent? Doing housework? Reusing leftovers to make new meals? Being the behind-the-scenes support role? Yeah, sure. I didn't like being in the spotlight and had no desire to be some big-shot corporate exec, but neither did I want to be the bottom-of-the-barrel nobody that did all the work but got none of the recognition. I mean, I didn't even have kids to justify my mediocre role in life. My yoke was a blessing, sure, but at times it also felt like a curse. Yeah, so it doesn't take a genius to understand where there came a point about 2 years ago when I started to become really resentful. Resentment is a funny thing. It doesn't just pop up out of nowhere. It builds gradually and slowly in increments so tiny you don't even see it until you're oozing with it. If you can imagine my yoke, it was incredibly heavy. Every single day I would find myself bitter, resentful, and utterly exhausted. Long before my gambling addiction, there were so many days when I was on my lunch break, and since I worked from home, I'd do chores around the house or take care of things that needed to be done. During my 1 hour break, I'd throw some dinner in the crock pot or change out the laundry from the washing machine to the dryer and have my phone to my ear calling in prescription refills while my husband worked on his next big project or had his phone in hand making Facebook and social media posts. I understood that everything he was doing was work, but it wasn't, work. I would never in a million years say that freelancers don't do real work, or stay-at-home moms don't do real work, or that people who own their own businesses don't do real work. They absolutely do. But there's an additional layer of stress that comes with a job where you have a boss and a schedule and a specific task list where if you don't get done what you need to get done, or you don't hit the targets that you need to hit, you could be reprimanded or even let go. I mean, I'm seriously blessed in the fact that I worked from home for the last decade. But for almost 20 years, I did do the commute thing. And there's no getting around it. It sucks. Even if you love your job, the grind just sucks. It's why it's called work. Do you know what the Sunday scaredsies are? I tried telling my hubby about the Sunday scaredsies before, and he didn't understand it. It's that feeling of dread and apprehension that you get around 5 p.m. on Sunday when the weekend is winding down to a close and you start thinking about Monday morning work. As a woman, the Sunday scaredsies would intensify if I still had some chores to do around the house or if I spent too much time relaxing and enjoying the weekend instead of doing household stuff. Every single weekend was a delicate yet stressful balance of trying to decompress from the previous week and get all the chores done that needed to be done so that I could start my week fresh. And I know you peeps know what I'm talking about. Hang with me. There is a point to all of this. So, day after day, I grew more resentful. Instead of the humble housewife that lets her husband lead and provide for the family, I was the one leading and providing for our family. And that family didn't even have kids. I remember many, many internal arguments that I had in my own mind about this. Why does he get to live such a stress-free life with no boss, no schedule, no responsibility? And how much longer am I expected to do this? Is this seriously my life? Of course, we have fun and we enjoy each other, and there is deep, deep love between us. But is my sole role in life only to be a juggler of a zillion chores and work and grind and more work and grind just to provide for us and be a loving, supportive wife to my husband? Life was so much easier and so much less responsibility before I got married. I loved the man, but didn't love the burden that came with marriage. I'd have a day that overflowed with righteous indignation. I woke up in the morning loving the man next to me, but dreading all of the responsibility on my shoulders. It was just too much responsibility, but yet I created this monster. Whenever I attempted to approach the subject, I didn't even know how to convey what I was feeling. My sweet hubby, concerned and wanting to soothe my irritation, asked what he could do to help. And a dozen times during that day, I had perfectly eloquent conversations in my head that rationalized and explained my frustration in precise detail with all the evidence to back it up. I argued with my own brain, debating the situation with such convincing drama that I felt more than sorry for myself. But when it came down to actually voicing those thoughts, the only thing that would come out of my mouth was something like, "Can you please just clean the cat litter boxes?" Perplexed, my husband would eye me warily and say, "Sure, of course. All you had to do was ask." But that only drove me battier, because really, ladies, all we want is to not have to ask, right? Funny, we had a good friend of ours up for a visit this week, and while he was here, I was vacuum sealing up some food. Only my vacuum sealer stopped working. In my attempt to troubleshoot it, I could see there was some gunk built up in the sensors. My husband and his buddy were standing right behind me, and so I said, "I think I figured out the problem. I'm guessing the sensors are clogged. It just needs a really good cleaning. Maybe it's old grease or something, I don't know, but hot water and a bit of soap should do the trick. And so, after peering into it for a few minutes, I asked my husband, "Can you please bring me one of those microfiber dishcloths?" He turned and then looked around the kitchen, obviously unsure of where those were. "In that drawer," I said, pointing, "where I keep all the other kitchen towels." So he pulled one out and handed it to me. "No," I said, exasperated. "Can you run it under hot water? Add some dish soap?" So then he doused it in hot water and squirted about a half a cup of dish soap on it. And then he handed it to me, dripping. "Oh, for Pete's sake," I said, snatching it from him and taking it to the sink where I wrung out some of the water and then re-rinsed it with more hot water to get rid of the excess soap. As I wrung it out a second time, I gave my hubby the look. You know the look, the wife look. But then our friend said something that I won't ever forget. He piped up and said with a good-natured sarcasm, "Yeah, man, come on. Don't you know the secret to being a good husband? You're supposed to be a mind reader. Communicate telepathically. She asked you to hand her the cloth, but in her head, she said hot water wrung out and only a dab of soap. You can't listen to the words, dude. You have to access her brainwaves. Get with the program." Isn't that what we all expect sometimes? That people, especially our spouses and partners, are going to be mind readers? Yeah, that knocked me down a rung or two off my high ladder. I began to wonder how many other times I had stomped around the house in agitated annoyance because my husband wasn't doing things that I hadn't actually asked him to do. And it was in that moment, that epiphany light bulb of wisdom and understanding, that I saw my entire gambling addiction and the serious imbalance that I'd had in my life. This third one, even though it's at the number 3 spot in my list, was my own personal downfall. I might have outwardly hated the spotlight and didn't want to be anyone of grand importance, but in my day-to-day life, I believed that all of my goals, my dreams and desires and expectations should be fulfilled, laid out in a grand ceremony at my feet. I thought back to that week of July 2022, when my kitty cat died and I fell into a bit of a midlife crisis. That had been a time of my pinnacle, the moment I'd reached my zenith of tolerance. I had turned from a humble, low-key, contented woman to someone who felt wronged, who needed to be vindicated, who had become a slave indebted to this burden and above the insult of the pitiful human being I'd become. I had believed that my husband didn't love me enough to care. And then, when my cat died, I believed that God didn't care either. It was all a massive injustice. I'll be honest, I recall thinking more than once, I'm better than this. I was made for more than this. And so I'd put on my best smiley happy face, while inside I lamented the unfairness of life. I deserved better. I deserved more. And so I began wallowing my sorrows in the numbing appeal and dopamine-inducing online slot games. As I began to gamble and get lost in the beginning throes of my addiction, I honestly have to admit that during those moments when I had wins, and not just the big ones, but the small ones too, I'd felt the way I thought I should feel deep down inside. A winner. I was finally someone who did something right, who got the thing that no one else got, who was finally going to do something noteworthy. Someone who could make more money in 1 hour than any of my friends or colleagues made in a week, or that my hubby could make in a month. I was someone who was not only going to pay off all our bills, but maybe get enough wins to buy a new car, or a new wardrobe, or do some much-needed repairs around the house. Screw the daily grind and the sucker's way of doing it, working their heinies off for months on end. I deserved more than that, and now it was my time. Not to start quoting Goonies on you, but that's how I felt. In the app, while I was gambling, that was my time. My time to be someone I thought I would like better. And with every win that came my way, I believed it was owed to me. Like God was finally blessing me and rewarding me for being the upstanding, righteous, hardworking Christian wife I knew I was. And again, being truthful, there was a part of me deep down inside that wanted to show everyone that even though I didn't have kids, even though I didn't marry a rich man who would take care of me, I could still live an amazing life and be looked at with envy and respect. I'd even show my husband how it was done, how to make some real money, be truly successful, maybe even find a way to make a side hustle from gambling so I could quit my job and finally do the things that I wanted to do. If I could land one jackpot every week, I could garden as much as I wanted and sleep in as late as I wanted. Yeah, I know, it sounds awful, but it wasn't snarky or uppity or conceited. I just felt like I should have more, be more, do more, earn more, be loved more, and everywhere I looked, I saw lack when there should have been abundance. The hardest part about realizing I was losing money from gambling was the awful, stark realization that I was actually a loser, not a winner. Then, on our last camping excursion of the previous summer of 2022, when I was about a month into my gambling addiction, something terrible happened. I'll never, ever forget that trip. We were staying at a campground, the same one I talked about in episode 28, The Sound of Silence, the one that was nearly full that we didn't end up staying at in that episode. I was so glad that during this camping trip, that campground was fairly empty because I wanted cell service in order to gamble. Every chance I got, instead of going on hikes or foraging for berries and mushrooms while my husband fished, I sat in my camp chair and gambled slots online. But one day during that camping week, we took a day trip to an area on a river that we'd only been to once before. It was about 2 hours away and had no cell service whatsoever. It was a hot, sunny day in late August. We turned off the main rural country highway and drove for a good 20 miles down a meandering, barely used road that was an old logging truck route from a decade earlier when the state had logged that part of the forest. We saw no car, no human being whatsoever, not even a cabin or any structure. We were deep, deep into the wilderness of the state forest. We parked the car where the rugged road ended at the river, ate some sandwiches for lunch, and then my husband donned his waders so he could explore the river and get a few hours of fishing in. I walked with him up a steep hill along a path so that he could enter into the river from the other side of the hill. The woods were thick, but from atop the hill you could see the valley and a bit of the winding river. When he had all of his gear ready to go, I gave him a kiss. "Got everything?" I asked him. "Yeah," he said. Then he checked his phone, which was nothing more than a fancy clock without cell service. He put it on airplane mode to save the battery before tucking it in a waterproof case around his neck. "How about we meet back up at the car in 2 hours? I'm going to carefully pick my way down the hill over there and try to find the river through the woods. I have a pretty good idea of where it is. It shouldn't be that far of a walk. If I can't find it, though, I'll come back." "Sounds good. You got your radio turned on?" I asked. He patted the zippered chest pocket in his waders. "Yep, it's in here. All set." We said our goodbyes, and I stood there, watching him traverse down the hill through the brush and undergrowth as he headed in the direction he was sure the river was. Even though it was hot, there was a good wind blowing on the top of that hill. I desperately wanted to gamble. I held my phone high up, as high as I could, but there wasn't even the slightest hint of a signal. I even tried climbing up on my SUV, but it was useless. I had nothing. Disappointed, I grabbed my own walkie-talkie radio, my small backpack, and a bottle of water, and then locked up the car. Even though the rough, rutted dirt road had been used on occasion by others, it was clear that we were in a really wild and remote area. For some reason, I felt uneasy. I kept thinking I heard a car coming, but it just turned out to be the sound of the river with its small waterfalls and springs. I wandered along the path, looking behind me, glancing around, unable to relax. I felt restless. I didn't really feel like walking or exploring. I'd brought along one of our camp chairs and set it up thinking I'd rather just sit for a while, but I didn't really feel like doing that either. Was this what withdrawal felt like? I knew that substance withdrawals were real. But was I really tweaking like that because I wasn't able to gamble? I wandered down the path, contemplating my options for keeping myself occupied for a few hours. Then, all of a sudden, I heard shouting coming from the valley. It was a panicked sort of yelling, desperate, frantic, distressed. I stopped in my tracks. I could hear it, but it wasn't clear what was being yelled over the wind. Then I heard it again. Ah! 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 Over and over. A man. Was it my husband? It had to be. There was no one else around for miles. My heart began to thud violently in my chest, and my pulse pounded in my ears. Adrenaline raced through my veins, and my body, which was by this time starting to become desensitized to the sensation of adrenaline thanks to my gambling, did not know how to react to this sudden situation. There was silence for a few moments, and then the yelling started up again, louder and more desperate. I still couldn't make out any of the words over the wind, but thought it sounded like someone was yelling for help. A man, and it had to have been my husband. It was clear that this was a life or death situation. My brain began to race. I knew my husband. He would not yell that way for just anything. He was the kind of guy that would break an ankle or chop off a finger and still make his way back to me without yelling for help. I understood then that if he was yelling with that kind of panicked desperation, it had to be bad. Really bad. As I stood there frozen, my brain began processing all kinds of scenarios. He slipped and fell and landed on the ground with a sharp tree branch pierced through his shoulder, or maybe his gut. He might be pinned somehow. Or maybe he was getting mauled by a bear, or a mountain lion, or a wolf. The yelling continued over and over. I finally had enough sense to reach for the walkie-talkie radio that I had clipped onto my backpack. "Hey, are you okay?" I yelled into the radio, breathing heavily, hands shaking violently. "What's happening? Where are you?" Silence. Nothing. I waited impatiently, pacing, chewing on my thumbnail, begging him to respond. No reply. Just more yelling coming up from down below in the valley, sounding haunting and ominous on the wind. Same desperation, same cadence, but fainter now. It sounded almost hopeless and despairing, like his strength was starting to wane. I began to run. I ran down the path until I got to the bank of the river, where the road had ended and we parked our car. I scanned the river frantically and again tried calling over the radio in case I had a clearer line of sight from that location. "Hey!" I yelled, holding down the button to transmit my call. "Are you there? What is happening? You're scaring me. Please answer, please." I couldn't comprehend why he wasn't answering me or why he hadn't been able to use the radio to call me. Did he just not have time because he was fighting off a wild animal? Was he bleeding out from a torn limb? Did he drop it as he fell and now couldn't reach it because he was severely injured or stuck somehow? I knew the radio was on, and I knew they were fully charged. I could not understand any of it. Again, no reply. I had no idea what to do. I couldn't hear the yelling anymore. It had finally faded into silence on the wind. I had no cell service, and it was at least 20 miles from the main highway. I had a general sense of the direction my husband went, but no idea where exactly. I ran up and down the path, over and over, up the hill hoping to hear him again, and then down the hill, constantly trying to reach him on the radio, wondering if maybe I'd see his body floating down the river, injured or perhaps even dead. I kept picturing him impaled on a sharp piece of wood or ripped to pieces by a wild animal. I'd never in my life heard that kind of agonized, desperate yelling from anyone, and couldn't even comprehend what could have happened to my husband that would make him cry out like that, continuously, for a good 5 minutes at the top of his lungs. I felt dizzy from the adrenaline, and I couldn't take it another second. Finally, my rational thinking kicked in. I was going to go in after him. I ran back to the car and quickly fished out our first aid kit that had trauma medical items in it. I also grabbed a bottle of water. The entire time, I kept praying, oh God, oh Lord, please don't let this be bad. Please don't let this be fatal. I'm alone and I don't know what to do and I'm scared. Over and over, I just kept murmuring, please. I slammed the car door shut and ran over to the spot at the edge of the path that overlooked the valley where my husband had entered into the brush to head downhill. I knew it would do neither of us any good if I ended up breaking my own ankle, so I tried not to rush as I picked my way through the thick undergrowth. With every ragged breath and every step, the dread grew darker and heavier. I didn't know if I was prepared, if I had the fortitude and the strength to see what lay ahead of me. I had no idea which awful imaginary scene I would find, but I knew none of them were going to be good. I felt sick. My stomach heaved violently with the inertia of all of my emotions. Just then, my radio chirped with my husband's voice. Hey, honey, I found the river and had a couple of nibbles, but I haven't caught anything. The river is kind of shallow and silty, so I don't know if there are any big brookies in here. Might just be nothing but minnows and chubs, but I'm going to keep poking around here and see if I can find a few good holes. I stopped in my tracks, utterly confused. It made 0 sense, but regardless, relief flooded my veins. My eyes blurred with tears at the sound of my husband's voice, steady and strong and perplexingly oblivious. What? I said back into the radio, choking a bit as my throat tightened. What are you talking about? Are you okay? What happened? Why were you yelling? Why didn't you answer the radio? I've been desperately trying to reach you for the last 15 minutes. A moment later, he answered back. Oh, you heard that? I heard it too. No idea what that was. I think someone was on the other side of the river, way across on the bank on the edge of the forest. Maybe they were lost? I tried waving at them, but didn't actually see anyone. Wait, you thought that was me? I clicked the side button to reply back, but I began full-on sobbing then, the aftermath of adrenaline and fear that had overcome me. I couldn't say much. I just stammered. I thought it was you. I don't know. I just thought something happened. Maybe dead. But I couldn't speak anymore. I was too overwrought with the understanding that it was all okay, that he was okay. It felt like an unbelievable miracle. He responded back one more time. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. I hadn't actually turned on my radio when I put it in my pocket. I thought I did, but it was turned off. Hang tight. I'm coming up. I slowly picked my way through the brush back up the hill and plopped down in the camp chair that I had set up, feeling numb with gratitude, relief, and utter confusion. I couldn't stop the leaking tears as I scanned the valley and the other side of the shore where the river cut through. I saw nothing and no one. There was no sound other than the wind and the rustling of the leaves, now and then the occasional caw of a crow or the buzzing of insects. It didn't make any sense whatsoever. Even if there was someone who had gotten lost and spotted my husband or me, that wasn't what I'd heard. A person lost in the woods would be desperate, yes, but it would be a hopeful kind of desperate yell, an attention-grabbing kind of desperate yell, not an agonizing, tormented, anguished yell. The yell that I heard made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Suddenly, I saw my husband picking his way through the brush towards me, stepping out onto the path. I jumped up out of my chair and flew over to him, flinging my arms around his neck and smothering his face in 100 kisses. I'd begun to sob then, really sob, big, gulping, racking sobs. He was hot, sticky, sweaty, covered in deep bug spray with bits of twigs and brush on him, but I didn't care one bit. I was just so relieved to see him whole and unscathed. "I'm so sorry, lover," he said, stroking my hair and murmuring into my ear. "I didn't mean to upset you or frighten you. It was stupid of me not to have done a mic check with the radios before I left. I'd honestly thought I'd turned it on. But I'm okay. You don't have to worry." As I walked back, I was horrified to realize what you must have been thinking and feeling. Thoroughly shaken and disturbed by the whole situation, we packed up our stuff and drove back to the campground. I didn't want to do any more exploring or fishing. On the ride back, my husband and I talked it out some more. "I agree that it didn't sound like someone who was just lost or trying to get our attention," he admitted. "After giving it some thought, I'm thinking the only possible explanation is that maybe there was a bear hunter out there setting up his bait piles, and the guy either came up on a bear or a bear came up on him, or maybe even treed him. I don't think he was trying to get our attention at all, actually. I think he was fighting off a bear or trying to scare off a bear." That was a more plausible scenario than someone who was lost, but it still didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Granted, there were regular bear hunters who drove way out in the remote woods in their four-wheelers or trucks to set up their bait piles for bear hunting, but these guys typically don't go in blindly, unprepared. They know what they're doing, and they all know there's a chance they could come up on a bear. So they'd have a gun or bear spray or some other means of defense, and they'd be on their guard. Sure, anomalies and strange occurrences happen, but it seemed far-fetched. Besides, what were the odds? I mean, at the time, I had been a betting girl. I knew those odds. It seemed 1,000,000 to 1, maybe 1,000,000,000 to 1, that at the exact day and time we were there, in the exact location we were, in the exact moment my husband would have reached the bottom of the hill in the valley, someone just happened to be out in that really remote stretch of wilderness in the same general direction as my husband, far enough away to not be noticed or seen by us, but close enough to be heard. And not only was he out there, but he was fighting off a bear? And to top it all off with a cherry on top, it was the one and only time in our history together that I tried to get my husband on the radio and couldn't reach him. I recalled in my mind the desperate, frantic yelling that I'd heard. I shuddered, remembering the uneasiness I felt right before I heard the shouting. You know that old saying, "It was like someone walked over your grave"? That's what it felt like. It's an old folklore, meaning that if you feel a sudden shivering in your spine, there's somebody walking over your future grave. I knew I'd never forget the precise way that tormented yelling sounded in my ears as long as I lived. I knew then, that this was no coincidental bear hunter in trouble. This, my friends, had been a demon. I tell you this story because even now, to this day, I knew that had not been an ordinary man. For weeks afterward, I scoured the online local news of the area, searching for any story about a man lost in the woods or who had been attacked by a bear. Those small towns print and report all of those small little incidents, and I couldn't find a single thing. I knew I wouldn't. That had without a doubt been a demon attack, perfectly executed and allowed by God so that I would be humbled and remember that there are far more important things in life than the grumbles and gripes of the daily grind. The purpose of that attack was this, that from that moment on, and now going forward, whenever I start to feel any kind of frustration or resentment about how life isn't fair, or how I'm doing more than my husband, or if I began to feel like the weight of my responsibilities were becoming too burdensome, I'd think back to that incident and immediately be reminded of how very blessed I am. Just recently, those old feelings of resentment and disillusionment and hardship began creeping back up on me. And only a couple of days ago, I thought about this topic. I remembered that whole incident so vividly, recalling the sounds and the emotions and the baffling lack of explanation immediately squashed any pity party that I was about to start planning for myself. Peeps, can I break this particular imbalance down for you as simply as I can? What it comes down to is this. Nearly all of us who are addicts are trying to escape from something, or numb ourselves from something, or justify something that is imbalanced in our lives. And I suspect that at the heart of it, that something is our inner victimhood. You know what I'm saying? We believe that we're victims of not having or not being what we think we're supposed to have or be. We're too pressured. We're too stressed. We care too much about our success or what others think of us, or our reputation, or trying to fit in, or trying to be the best husband, wife, mother, father, employee, business owner, creator, influencer, teacher, pastor, homemaker, whatever. And we're constantly striving for that best because we believe we deserve it. All of that measure of success comes from what other people think about us, say about us, write about us, or behave toward us. When in fact, that's all wrong. The only one that you should care about is God, what He thinks about you. You know that friend of ours that was up visiting this past week? During his stay, he'd occasionally use the exclamation, "Jesus Christ," or "Oh my God." And to his credit, I have to give him props, he kept checking himself and apologizing to us. But here's the truth of it that I don't think he quite understood. It wasn't that saying those things in that way offended us, but rather it offended God. Because most of us in this world reduce him down to, at worst, a couple of expletives, or at best, the genie waiting off in the wings, like some butler hovering discreetly nearby until summoned by our beck and call. There are very, very few who understand the bigness, the holiness, the strength and the might and the power of God. It's not an easy thing to comprehend, I know, and we can't physically see him. And today's society, fueled by social media, does a fantastic job of ensuring that every human believes we're the most important thing, that it's our status, our importance, and the things that we have that count the most. Our needs, our wants, our goals come first. We feel like we need to climb our own pedestals and put ourselves there and make ourselves the center of the universe and live our lives as if we're the kings and queens of this earth. Every single thing we have, folks, comes from God. We wake up in the morning with breath in our lungs to see a new sunrise because of Him. Our jobs, our homes, our work and our success, our material possessions, our relationships and our marriages, it all comes from Him. He's the most important one, not us. In a blink of an eye, in one moment, it can all disappear. I learned that from that crazy incident on our camping trip when I was sure I'd lost my husband. Do you think for a second that if I had continued on in those woods and ended up finding my husband ripped to shreds, dead from a bear or a wolf attack, that I would give a crap about the repairs my home needed, or what kind of car I drove, or how much money I had in the bank, or what people thought of me on social media? Allow me to give you a prediction about your life that I can guarantee with 100% certainty. You are going to die, and so are your loved ones. No one escapes that. No one has control over that. Psalm 90, verses 2 through 4 says this: "Before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the whole world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. You turn people back to dust, saying, 'Return to dust, you mortals.' 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by." King Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived according to history, wrote this in the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 3, verses 19 and 20. "Surely the fate of human beings is like that of the animals. The same fate awaits them both. As one dies, so does the other. All have the same breath. Humans have no advantage over the animals. Everything is meaningless. All go to the same place, all come from dust, and to dust all return. Our God created the universe, our earth, the mountains, the valleys, the seas, and the deserts. The incomprehensible diversity of plant, insect, and animal life, and all the wonderful and awesome complexity of humans. He gives life, and He takes life away. We are each one grain of sand, one speck of dirt, and to the sand and dirt those bodies will return. The Lord promises those who love Him a new earth and a new body to enjoy for all of eternity. No fear, no pain, no loss or grief or worry or sorrow or death, no strife, no anxiety. He controls the heavens, the wind, the stars, the rain. Nothing happens without His knowledge or His command. He knows every bird, every blade of grass, every beetle, every flower. Your life belongs to Him and was created by Him, and all that you have in it comes from Him. My dear friends, I say this with the utmost gentleness and respect and kindness. Humble yourselves. That was the lesson I had to learn from that incident on our fishing trip. The little things don't matter. Those little things that we stress over, that we strive for, that cause us worry or concern, that make us feel like victims or that might seem unfair. None of it matters. What you have or don't have doesn't matter. What you think you need or believe you're owed doesn't matter. The gossip that's said behind your back, or the troll comments online that irritate you, or the brand name label on your clothes, or the balance in your checking account don't matter. There are billions of people right now living in poverty without clean drinking water or food to feed their children who would give their right arm to switch places with us, to have our lives to be the victims that we think we are. We are not victims. We are blessed beyond measure. We all need to have better balance and understanding of what's really important and who is truly important and what really matters. You know what really matters? The 2 commandments that Christ gave to humanity. And trust me, they aren't that difficult to do. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind. And love your neighbor as yourself. Love is what matters, peeps. That's it. I think we've watered down the definition of love these last several decades, though. Just like much of society has reduced God down to a couple of cuss words or maybe a Thanksgiving prayer over turkey, we've also reduced the word love down to a ubiquitous word that can mean anything from a heart emoji on a comment to the way we feel about our favorite gourmet cheese, to the appreciation we have for our treasured golf club or designer handbag or favorite coffee mug. That's not love. That's self-recognition. That's caring about what others think. That's not what God thinks. This week, the imbalance of self-importance is number 3 on a list of 20. That means we've still got 17 more to go, friends. But I'm telling you, if this particular thing is off balance in your life, you're never going to be able to master the others and to stand tall and straight, upright with peace and joy leading your way. Instead, you're going to have anxiety, worry, resentment, concern, and bitterness and exhaustion dominating all your thoughts and directing your path. You're going to wake up in the morning with the imbalanced weight of the world on your shoulders, and you're going to go to sleep at night believing the world still owes you more. So, how do we fix this? What's the answer to this one? Out of all of them, this is by far the simplest. If I may quote John Lennon, all you need is love. Seriously, that's it. This week, I want you to make a conscious effort to love on other people. Maybe it's your spouse or partner that's struggling with something. Maybe it's a child who's out of sorts as they adjust to the new school year. It could be an aging parent that's losing their mobility, or a best friend that doesn't know how to manage her workload. Perhaps a neighbor who's been going through a hard time who would delight in a visit and maybe a plate full of homemade muffins or a picnic lunch. One of the best things that put a smile on my face this week was the generous heart of our friend who was here for a visit. He's got a huge heart, and when he got a real sense of our financial predicament, he showered us with small gifts that were huge in our eyes. A few bottles of wine, a new fillet knife, and some bolts for my hubby's crossbow. Even a gift of money to help pay our bills. Do you know what it felt like to have that kind of love poured out onto us without any expectation of reciprocating or paying it back? Now, I'm not saying that love is only shown through gifts or money. How many of us, when seeing a post on social media about a friend losing a loved one, simply comment, "So sorry for your loss," or "You're in my prayers," or "Our condolences"? Imagine for a sec just taking a few minutes out of your day to stop and get a card, like a real card, and mailing it to them instead. Or have you ever had a friend send you a long text about something upsetting that happened in their day, and you, thinking you were being all big and gracious and generous, took precious time out to put the effort into a detailed text back? Forget that. How about you call that friend up and suggest a movie night together, or maybe a lunch date, or invite them over to chat, or just spend time listening to them vent, and promise them that the modem for your internet will be unplugged so you're not distracted. How many ways can you love this week? How many inconsequential things can you set aside with the understanding that they are meaningless in this world? What things are you spending time on building yourself up that you could instead be working to build others up? It doesn't even have to cost much. Got an old book lying around that you think your mom would love? Wrap it up and drop it off at her house. Send some funny cartoons or articles via snail mail to your grandpa. Plan a surprise date night for your spouse. Invite your friend out on a hike. When you find out someone is sick, don't think, "Ew, germs, I'm going to steer clear of them for a while." Instead, make them a batch of homemade chicken noodle soup and buy them a few old-fashioned paper magazines that you think they might enjoy. Maybe offer to help them out with chores or laundry. If your elderly neighbor mentions to you that they just had surgery, don't just wish them a speedy healing and run inside to avoid the details. Offer to cut their lawn for them, or maybe they need some help with a few groceries. Folks, I'm telling you, we've lost the fine art of loving on others. What you throw out there in life comes back. What you give, you receive. If you're only ever consumed with thoughts about all the minutia of your life and your career and your home and your material needs and your comforts and desires and injustices and your anxieties and your worries, you're going to miss out on all the joy and all the peace that this particular topic of balance can bring. It's so amazing once you get it and understand it and put it into practice. It's truly setting down the heavy weight of something that you didn't even realize you were carrying. And society tells us that carrying it is the only way, the right way to live, that it's all about us. Love yourself first above everything, right? Self-care, self-love, self. No, friends, Jesus tells us to deny ourselves and to pick up our cross and follow him. He explains this so well in the parable of the sheep and the goats from Matthew 25, verses 31 through 46. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father. Take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of this world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat, and I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you?" The king will reply, "Truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." Then he will say to those on his left, "Depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his demons. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not look after me." They will also answer, "Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty, or a stranger, or needing clothes, or sick, or in prison, and did not help you?" He will reply, "Truly, I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did not do for me." Then they will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life. God bless you all. Stay safe, and I'll see you next week when I read Chapter 4, The Imbalance of Busyness.
Like holy water, like salt on a bird, rain in a drought, it's all over.